Praise Ahia family. He's the great, holy, most excellent King over all kings, rulers, governments of all the earth, the only true wise and living God, the Almighty. Well, hello family. I hope you're all happy, blessed and well and are having excellent Sabbath days thus far. Well, coming back on today to really pick up from where we've gotten to so far, we seem to be dwelling on the topic of Mystery Babylon rather a lot. And I was really thinking of trying to move away from this topic, but I find myself increasingly drilling down to look in further detail at it because it explains so much about what we currently see going on around us today, because we essentially live in Mystery Babylon. It's a mystery in terms it has a secret, in that many of people don't know and aren't aware that they are actually living in the Mystery Babylon system. Hence, it's a mystery in plain sight, effectively. But coming on today, really, to talk about the subject of Mystery Babylon yet again, we have been doing some spiritual mapping, essentially, identifying the nature of this beast system. And I couldn't really decide what to call tonight's topic. So I've called it the Glory Killers, because essentially you have to recall that the entirety of the book of Revelation, essentially, and this book, it deals with the judgment of Mystery Babylon, essentially. It's all about Mystery Babylon. And the controversy that Ahia has against this particular system because of what it did essentially to his churches. So it opens in the opening of the book of Revelation. He deals with the 7 churches. So you have to recall there were 7 stars, 7 candlesticks, 7 angels that were the property of the 7 churches. And if you recall, we explained when we looked at in our previous video on looking at Revelation 17:10, identifying the 7 kings of Mystery Babylon, we looked at the 7th king in a little detail, which we said was Constantine, and we explained that what his name encoded was papacy. And we explained that one of the things essentially that the papacy did was it migrated its capital into Asia, if you recall. And that was to pursue the glory of these churches and to exterminate them, essentially. So it's for that controversy, essentially, is one of the main things, as well as the controversy as well as what was done to his people. The Yashraelites, or the black Yashraelites, essentially, is also what is actually foretold in terms of the judgment that Yahuwah is coming to exact, essentially from this Mystery Babylon, this beast system. So before we get fully into looking further at that, let's start, as we like to do, with doing our opening readings of the law. So if you recall in the previous recording, we looked at the law from the New Testament. We do usually look at it from Exodus 20, verses 1 to 17. But in our previous recording, our previous video, a Sabbath closed session, we did actually look at the law from the New Testament perspective. And I think we'll do that again today. Why not? So let's begin. So our first reading, as we explained, is taken from Isaiah 42, verse 21, which says quite simply, "The Lord is well pleased for his righteousness' sake. He will magnify the law and make it honorable." So we're going to look really at what Yahuwah did and how he magnified the law and what the responsibilities of the law now become incumbent on us as individual believers to now do in the performance of that law, essentially, or to manifest, if you like, as part of our daily walk. So the first reading we're going to do as part of that is taken from Matthew 5, verses 1 to 12. And I put it up here on the Bible Gateway app for you to all read along with me as we go. So let's begin. So it says here, "And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain. And when he was set, his disciples came unto him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you, falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. So now essentially Matthew 5, which we know today, or Christian knows as the Beatitudes, tells you, I guess, the attributes or outworkings now of the manifestation of the law being magnified or amplified, because now it's written on the hearts and within the hearts of Yeshua's people. So, of course, we're told that we are to be poor in spirit in terms of being totally reliant on Yahuwah for everything, to mourn as well, or to be very sober-minded in our attitudes, in our walk, in the way that we conduct and comport ourselves. And we're told that the reward is that we will receive comfort, to be meek in our attitude, to hunger and to thirst after righteousness, to be merciful as well in our dealings with others, to be pure in heart, to be peacemakers as well, and to take up our cross really and to follow Yahuwah in terms of, it's saying in verse 10 that we're blessed if we're persecuted because we know that the kingdom of heaven is ours. So hopefully that makes sense. You can kind of see the point that I'm making here. Going down then to verses 17 to 19, it goes on to say, think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So that's our second scripture in the reading of the law. Let's now go on to our third, which is Matthew 22, verses 35 to 40, which read, Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him and saying, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So going on then to our fourth and final reading, which is Revelations 22, verses 13 to 15, which now goes on to say, Blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life, and may enter in through the gates into the city. For without are dogs, and sorcerers, and whoremongers, and murderers, and idolaters, and whosoever loveth and maketh a lie. Okay, so that's our reading of the law. Sorry about that. I'm not quite sure my camera keeps freezing up today for some reason. I have to keep reactivating it. So that's our reading of the law. So as I said, we are continuing really on our theme of looking at Mystery Babylon. And we have been on this theme now for a number of weeks. because essentially it explains so much about what is currently going on in our world really today, and really just, well, in terms of everything, in terms of even the sheer order of things, really. So I guess I probably am going to start with looking at the festivals of Mystery Babylon, because we have just come through the Easter holiday, and this whole festival, which we now know to be a pagan festival, is something of a point of contention currently amongst especially those believers who still remain in the Christian churches, because many of them are still continuing to observe this particular festival as if it's a Christian festival, and it has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with Christianity. In fact, you may be interested to know that Easter, if you do a simple internet search on when is Easter, you'll see that the actual definition that the internet will return to you is that Easter is the first Sunday after the full moon that occurs on or after the spring equinox. So if it were a true commemoration of the crucifixion of Christ, then it would actually occur on the Passover, but it doesn't do that. And there still is a point of argument, because many Christians still think that it's okay, I guess, to actually commemorate the crucifixion of Christ on this pagan day that's actually a festival of the day of the birth of Semiramis, or the Queen of Heaven, as she's alternatively known. But this apparently was meant to be the day on which this particular pagan goddess actually descended in the form of an egg and landed on the dried riverbed of the river Euphrates, and hatched from there, essentially. And I was kind of seriously shaking my head a little bit, because, as I've been pointing out, quite a lot on the internet is actually being amended and changed really right before our eyes. And when I did an initial search for the Easter to try to verify whether or not, or what it was saying in terms of it being a Christian holiday, a couple of searches were actually returning and saying, yes, it's a fully Christian holiday, which I thought was quite amazing, because it's renowned to be a pagan fertility ritual, essentially. Hence the actual association with bunny rabbits and Easter eggs. So I think I found one site, nationaltoday.com, that was actually saying that Easter is a Christian holiday, and it was saying that the name is taken from the Hebrew word Pesach, which is totally untrue. The two terms have absolutely no association whatsoever. They don't even sound similar as well. And I also found references that date back to an Anglo-Saxon monk, apparently in Britain, called the Venerable Bede, who in the 8th century actually remarked that the month of April was called, if I can pronounce this, Easter Monaf, or Estre month, after the goddess Estre, spelled Eostre. And he wrote as far back as the 8th century that a pagan festival of spring in the name of the goddess had become assimilated into the Christian celebration of the resurrection of Christ. So these celebrations essentially worship Satan through nature, essentially. And they have no association at all with Christian things. I also found another site, I think it's called seafaith.com. And that site does actually explain the origins in a bit more detail of the festival. So the word, apparently Easter, is actually derived from the word Ishtar. And this was a day on which many people who practiced pagan religion commemorated the resurrection of one of the gods they worshipped, called Tammuz. So they believed that this god was the offspring of their moon goddess and their sun god. So their sun god was essentially Nimrod. As you know, he was the grandson of Noah, of Noah's son Ham. And Nimrod married his own mother, Semiramis, and became a powerful king. And he was kind of elevated to the status of a god-man, essentially, by his wife and mother, Semiramis. Eventually, Nimrod was killed. He died quite a gruesome death, and his body was cut into pieces, apparently, and sent to various parts of his kingdom. And Semiramis told the people of Babylon, essentially, that he ascended to the sun, and was now to be called Baal, the sun god. So she also promoted herself as a kind of goddess of his religion as well. So she also then, I believe, conceived a child after Nimrod was dead. And she said that she conceived it from the rays of the sun. She claimed kind of some immaculate kind of conception as well, which is a huge blasphemous lie. But anyway, so Semiramis became known as Ishtar, which is pronounced Easter. And she claimed that she came down from the moon in a giant moon egg that fell into the Euphrates River on the first full moon after the spring equinox. And this is the date of Easter, is actually the first full moon after the spring equinox. So the spring equinox is the day on which the kind of amount of day and darkness is equal, apparently, on this day. And that actually is signified to mark the beginning of spring or the start of spring in nature. It's kind of what they believe. So this isn't the Passover, of course. The first Sunday after the full moon that occurs on or after the spring equinox is not the Passover, which is when Yeshua was actually slain. So you may actually be dishonoring Christ by commemorating his crucifixion and burial at this time. So I really would encourage every Christian really to look at this in a bit more detail and think very long and hard about this point. Because when I first saw this point, there was no further doubt for me. And I haven't really commemorated Easter since, to be honest. It kind of put things into quite good perspective for me. And I was quite an avid lover of the whole tradition in terms of the Easter eggs. Well, I wouldn't say, I just like the chocolate, basically. I didn't really know what it symbolized until much later on. But when I did become aware of it, I did actually amend that and stop celebrating it immediately and instead started commemorating the Passover. And as I said before, I actually started commemorating the Passover long before I knew that I was even a Yisraelite. I think it's very, very important to walk in the fullness of the light that we've received. I don't think it's a good thing to know something and just say, oh, well, we can't know what the ultimate truth of it is, so let's just forget about it altogether. And this was one of the points I raised when we were looking at the 13th month in our calendar, because some people were saying, well, we can't know the dates perhaps with accuracy, so why don't we just abandon the whole thing and just not do the feast or not observe the dates at all? And I don't think that's a good plan of action. You have to walk in the fullness of the light that you've received and trust Yahuwah to align you and to bring you into the light, into the truth. Because you have to recall there was a person in the Bible who did that. He said, Sarah, I knew that you were a hard man and that you reap what you haven't sown. Therefore, I took the 1 talent you gave me and I buried it in the earth. And if you recall, Yahuwah calls him a wicked and a disobedient servant because he could even have given his money to the money changers and let them actually generate interest on it. But even that he didn't do. So we don't want to be in that position of just abandoning the law, the festivals of our covenant, which Yahuwah has given us to keep because we find it too difficult to do, or we don't know. We can have an excuse to say we don't know the fullness of the facts. That may be true, but we have to walk in the fullness of what we do know. And all I do know is that I have commemorated or always actually constructed the calendar each year in exactly the same way. And I'm pretty certain that where I've actually designated the actual months to begin and to complete, I'm sure that that's correct. I've done it consistently now for the at least a good last 5 or so years. And it's generally been quite accurate and aligned to, in general terms, to what other camps and both Yisraelite groups have been doing until, of course, this year, because I think a leap year, and this edition of the additional 13th month is kind of where I've deviated because I've shown you scripture and verse as to where Ahia has said that is not to be done, that we shouldn't do that. And so I've tried to be quite faithful to that. So, as I was saying, just at that point, I would really instruct or encourage you as much as possible to look into that for yourself and to satisfy yourself that you're assured that you are doing the best that you can in terms of really understanding what we should be doing in terms of what festivals we should commemorate. Because I don't think it's a great thing, to be honest, if we are commemorating the death of Christ on a sun nature worship day, which we know to be a day in which reverence is given to powers of darkness. Because it essentially then means that your energy, that worship you're giving to a higher, to some extent, is being channeled as well into another entity or realm. And this was a point I made as well about our calendar being realigned, that in their doing that, to try to now make our calendar dates for the Passover align essentially with the pagan Easter dates, they are trying also to channel or to essentially draw on the power and the worship that we are giving to a higher to now feed into their regime and into their realm also. So it's not a great thing that we do in actually realigning the calendar to align like that, because you have to actually break the calendar by adding in this additional 30 days for the 11 days they identify or think is missing. But as I say anyway, so we started to talk about the Mystery Babylon system, and we have been looking at this now for a number of weeks, and seem to be, well, not fully completely finished looking really at this whole area. And it's quite significant because we are aware that Yahuwah has been saying consistently to his people that we are to come out of this system and to be separated from it. And so if we can't make a clear articulation or identification of it, it's going to be very, very difficult to know what exactly you need to come out of. And, the Bible does say in Job 9, verse 24, that the earth is given into the hands of the wicked, because he covereth the faces of the judges thereof. If not, where and who is he? So we can see that even for Yasharel's disobedience, because of course, Yahuwah did confirm he made the earth for Yasharel's benefit and for his people. But of course, because Yasharel essentially defaulted on keeping her side of the covenant and broke the covenant completely, and then didn't receive their Messiah, they didn't know the hour of their visitation. So as a consequence, they lost essentially their heritage, not completely. Romans 11 explains that all Israel shall be saved, and that it was a momentary, in a sense, a blessing to the Gentile nations who were then able to be grafted in. But it was blindness to Israel. And we have looked at that also in previous recordings. We'll come back as well to that, because it's a very, very powerful scripture that has explained so much about where we currently find ourselves today. Because I hear some saying that we've been in captivity for 400 years, but from the times that Christ proclaimed that we would go into captivity from the time of his resurrection, essentially, until the time of the end, it's been closer to, well, almost 2,000 years, to be honest, which isn't great. But he's saying here that the earth is given into the hands of the wicked, because he covereth the faces of the judges are totally covered. Because if the faces of the judges of God's righteousness weren't covered, they'd be able to identify and to tell you where and who Mystery Babylon is and who is ruling at this time, and be able to clearly locate the activities of darkness and of the devil, essentially. But it's saying they can't do that, because it's saying, well, if their faces weren't covered, then why can no one tell me who or where Satan is? Because the book of Revelation is telling us quite clearly that he is seated literally in our midst, this Mystery Babylon, in the midst of the earth, essentially. And it's telling you that in this actual mystery system, I believe it's Revelations 18:24 tells you that she's responsible for the blood of all who are slain in the earth. So every kind of murder, every kind of arson, every kind of criminality is to be attributed to this regime, this Mystery Babylon system. Even the agendas we see around gender politics, it all comes from this wicked root that is seated upon the seven heads, or this city upon the seven hills, which we identify to be Rome. So as I say, the book of Revelation very, very much deals with the takedown of this Babylonian system, which is one and the same system as was originated by Nebuchadnezzar, essentially, in the beginning, the Assyrians, under the Assyrians. And you have to recall also that in Hosea 11 verse 5, Yahuwah did actually proclaim concerning that Yasharel, that the Assyrian would be her king, because she refused to repent and return to Ahijah. So you can see really from how long this has been a condition really for Black Hebrew Israel to be under the oppression of Assyria, essentially, under the Babylonian kings. So Hosea 11 verse 5 says, he shall not return into the land of Egypt, but the Assyrian shall be his king, because they refused to return. So this was an initial kind of preliminary judgment that Yahuwah prescribed against Yasharel. And really, when you read down the whole litany of the Old Testament, you can see how Yahuwah fought. He really did fight with our forefathers to save us from falling into a second Egypt. He tried everything, but unfortunately our forefathers wouldn't be persuaded to return fully to him. And even now, Yasharel still continues in many, many respects to fight against returning to Yahuwah fully. And those of us who are returning, but in some ways in a very kind of intellectual, mental sense, and not really in a spiritual sense, because we are now in a spiritual battle, essentially, that requires spiritual insight and understanding. And it also requires the actual power of the Spirit of Yahuwah to also fight and to defend his people. And we're going to need to come into a knowledge, really, of Yahuwah and to serve him, to approach him in spirit and in truth, because that is what he requires, essentially. So I have always also previously explained that Yahuwah is really expecting us to do the harder work now of not only making a return to him, but doing the harder work of now starting to take his yoke upon us. The word of God says his yoke is easy and his burden light. But now to begin to learn his ways and to be filled with the Spirit, really to make a spiritual return. And as I've said, I think this is an area where the men, particularly in Yasharel, do struggle, perhaps more, because I think they find it easier to think of kind of fighting against or fighting a kind of war more with kind of your fists and physical weapons, kind of in a kind of physical way. The actual nature of the war that we are now in the midst of is a spiritual battle. It's a battle that's fought mainly psychologically in the mind as well. And it's an age-old battle because, as I say, it really began from the times of Nebuchadnezzar, who set up Babylon, essentially. And Babylon was the kingdom of darkness's response to the overthrow of Babel, essentially the Babel Tower. It was their attempt to reinitiate that whole kind of a system of darkness by reinitiating or raising up the Tower of Babel once again in the earth. And we saw a notable outworking of this last year in March the 6th, I believe it was, when there was a visit by the Pope to Iraq to actually visit. He said he was going to the actual Babel Tower to pray, was kind of the official line that was released. But there were a lot of coverage in the media about this particular event, of course, because Yahuwah has been actually fighting for his people, really. And many are possibly not aware of the actual nature of the battle that's been going on, particularly since 2020, because Yahuwah essentially had removed or dealt a very, very significant blow to the Babylon system to get his people out and to get people free. But unfortunately, either many weren't aware of the battle that was being fought. And so what the actual Kingdom of Darkness needed to do was to try to reinitialize their tabernacles, because Mystery Babylon is also a tabernacle, the tabernacles of Edom. Tabernacles of Edom, synagogues of Satan. It's a Masonic system, essentially, is kind of how it manifests. So Yahuwah broke that whole system down and literally got everybody out of it in 2020. And hence, that was really the reason for what then subsequently happened and the pressure with the mandates for people to receive these so-called inoculations. basically. So they were mandated as inoculations, but there was a spiritual acceptance also that was also incumbent or accompanied also the receiving of those treatments, for want of a better term, to try to reinitialize or get everybody under that system again. So it was a very, very crude attempt, but that's what was actually going on. And the root of who the mandate was from, again, is to be found upon the person, well, whosoever is seated upon the 7 heads. So again, going back to Rome. And I have done previous discussions on this as well. There are articles are published online on our site that do look at all of this. I can't recall the actual name. I think it's called Remembering the Sabbath Day or something like that. I've actually touched on it in that particular blog on the words page of our blog. I can't recall the name of it, but it's the article, if you scroll down on that page, that actually looks at the, actually has a picture of a mitre on it. In fact, I can probably show you, actually, or find it with you. Find it with you now. Let me see. Just for clarity. So this is our website, and I seem to have frozen again. Okay, seem to be back again. So this is our website, as we have said. So if you go to this page here, some additional content that's published here. Not quite sure why it's slow today. The articles take a while to come up. So it was a little while ago, but it's actually yes, it's actually in this article here. The Sabbath day to keep it holy. I've actually looked at that sort of detail in that particular article there. So there's a lot of content published on here, as you can see. There's also a channel here which has got a number of the Sabbath day closed sessions on it. It's a strictly kind of evangelical channel that's quite new also to the site. Just digressing slightly, we do also have a store as well, which we actually do or have a number of items as well that you can purchase. I have a number of these items in my home as well. People do comment on them when they come to visit, either with cushions, soft furnishings, with scriptures, hymns, words of encouragement on them as well. And there's also a streetwear collection as well on here also. So just digressing there to kind of give you a flavour. Okay, and for some reason it's freezing again. Why is it doing that? Okay, we're back again. Yeah, so I have actually looked at that sort of level of detail there in those articles as well. So as I was saying, this is what I call we're looking at kind of the attributes of this Mystery Babylon. And one of the things we've said that they are is glory killers. So we explained how the book of Revelation deals with the judgment essentially for the 7 churches. So as I say, there were 7 stars, 7 candlesticks, 7 angels, which were the property of the 7 churches. And we did explain how in the beginning of, I guess, the ascent of this church, just after Christ's resurrection, there were 7 churches established by the disciples in Asia. And these are the 7 churches to which John the Revelator writes, and for which he was also imprisoned as well. And John, at the hands of Domitian, who we explained was one of the kings, he was the 6th king of the Mystery Babylon system. Because if you recall, we looked in Revelation 17:10 at Yahuwah saying there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, or the one that was the one who actually consigned John the Revelator to the Isle of Patmos. And that was Domitian, son of Titus, brother of Titus, son of Vespasian. Yes. So we looked at that whole legend as well. So yes, John writes to the 7 churches which are in Asia. So we explained how the persecution that they suffered, because of course you recall the prophecies that Christ himself gives in, I think it's Luke 22, where he's saying that when you see Jerusalem compassed about with armies, he tells his people to flee to the mountains. So namely, they begin to flee into Africa. And there are even accounts from, I believe, Africans at around about that time of a huge influx of Hebrews, of Israelites, fleeing into Africa, of course, to hide. Israelites have always gone into Africa to hide. Even Christ himself, if you recall, when fleeing from Herod, his parents took him into Africa to hide there until Herod was dead. Then they returned back into the land of Israel. They went far from the capital. They turned aside into the coast region, into a little place called Nazareth, a very, very quiet, obscure town, to raise Yeshua there. So yes, so Israel has always fled into Africa to hide. So those who didn't heed Yahuwah's warning to actually flee were actually caught up by the Romans, and they were treated very brutally because, of course, those that weren't sold into slavery, and particularly the Christians, were persecuted to extermination, because this Mystery Babylon system, which wasn't yet then a religious system. It was kind of in its old military guise, as it had been from the times of Nebuchadnezzar to that time, spanning a period of almost 2,000 years, if not more. It had we operated under a kind of military guise, always in the open. But this church or this system exacted such punishments on the Israelites in this kind of attempt to essentially seize on the glory of the Israelites, to rule by it. So if you recall, we did a previous recording. It's not actually recorded as a video, it's actually a podcast. And that's published both on the page I just showed you. It's called the Magi 101. And it's also on the Hebrew Diaspora News, our sister channel as well, published there as a podcast. And we explained the actual, what the Magi do, how they operate. And we explained that the Magi, of course, is a word from which we get words like magician from. We explained how the wise men that came to visit baby Jesus were bringing gifts. We explained that they were kings who came from the east. But we also explained that that they were prognosticators, so they were avid consultants of divination, witchcraft essentially, and they were also consultants or astronomers as well. They consulted the stars, and of course they saw Yahuwah's star rising. I believe it was in the east, and so they actually came to they actually followed that star, of course, and it led them directly to where Yeshua was actually where he was born. So we explained really that every single believer has a star essentially, and a personal heavens that is essentially over their own head. Essentially, that's the one of the things that story does actually tell you. And these magi, as you see, they inquire into the stars, really of everyone, of everything that's born, everyone that's born. And that's one of the reasons why what they do is so egregious and so displeasing to Yahuwah, because of course, if you have or seek for that sort of occult and hidden knowledge, the temptation to take or to interfere or to do what you shouldn't do to other people's destiny and stars would be too great. And so that was the reason we explained that when man fell, one of the first things that Yahuwah did actually close off was man's ability to see directly and freely into the spirit realm. So we did actually explain this on the previous recording that we did, actually looking at the Valley of Vision and explaining that essentially the whole world is in this wilderness of the Valley of Vision. Revelation does clearly tell you that. We look at the instance of mystery Babylon, and we see that Yahuwah actually takes John to the wilderness to actually see this spectacle, to see this sight of Mystery Babylon, that she is in the midst of a desolate wilderness, essentially, seated upon a sea of the nations that are also resided there. So, as I say, this particular entity, this Mystery Babylon under Domitian, it really did begin to unleash essentially hell on the Yashraelites, to really try to exterminate all kind of reverence to Yeshua and the resurrection. But not only that, it was kind of actually trying to assume the star, the place and the responsibility of Yashrael as well in that pursuit. And in doing so, it pursued these churches into Asia. So you recall that in order to do so and to conceal, I guess, the actual move they were trying to make against the stars of this, or the star of Yeshurel, they then began to themselves adopt, you hear the adage, you can't beat them, join them. So they began to adopt the mantle or the appearance of priests, essentially. So this militaristic empire system, which had always functioned as a military, Julius Caesar was really the one who really initiated Rome as a kind of formal empire. And he's also one of the kings. Yes, I think he's the fifth king of the Mystery Babylon system, because Rome itself has 10 kings, or had 10 kings, literally from Julius Caesar to Constantine. There are 10 kings, and then of course there's another king that will come after that king, the 8th, who is of the 7, which we looked at in Revelation 17 verse 11. And if you want to find out more about that, you have to look at the other video. It would be too long for me to go into all the detail here. But the video that we did called Who Are the 7 Kings of Revelation 17:10, and that's published both on the homepage, the actual hashtag Wewillrestorehispaths channel on the homepage of our website, as well as it's on our YouTube channel also, if you want to have a look at that. But all that information is published there. So yes, so as we're saying, this whole Babylonian Roman system had 10 kings overall, from Julius Caesar to Constantine. I didn't actually itemize all of those kings in that particular teaching. That it's not really core to the actual central message of Revelation 17:10, as you'll see when you look at that video. As I've just published purely just the names of these 7, well, the 8 kings, because we also found the identity of the one who is coming, who also lived in the past. We found that, and we also then verified it because we checked in terms of who the Muslims are currently expecting to return, and the 2 things tallied identically. And as I explained, I didn't actually look at that information before I prepared my notes. But after I prepared my notes, I looked to see who those who are now awaiting the Messiah are waiting to return, and it was bingo, it was spot on. So that just Yahuwah confirming his word really there. So do have a look at that. So as I explained, this church